My name is Brad with Blue Nile Farm, and today we're going to talk about the Hustler, Bale, and Roller that I use in my rebaling operation on my farm. Now, there's different units that exist there, and we're going to talk about the Hustler specifically because that's the unit that I'm familiar with. But there's a lot of units that exist that are a lot more costly, around $25,000 to $30,000 or more, and they're a multiple unit operation where they'll take a round bale and they will unroll it and they'll fluff it and they'll actually run a feeder to the bottom of the baler, and then it's going to be fed into the baling system. These units are standalone. The Hustler unit, for example, or there's the Alltech. That's one that has a chain, and basically the round bale itself goes on this platform, and the platform will compress it against these metal tines. They're on this unit, and I'll use the term waterfall a lot because the difference between a standalone unit and probably the more expensive units is that this one's fed over the top and water falls into the baler, where the other units that are more expensive will actually run the bale and be fed just like they are in the field at the bottom and fed through the baler. So in this video, we're going to talk about the baler itself, because no matter what system you have, you're going to have the same problem because the baler is a stationary unit. So you're going to have a lot of hay that's going to be bound up between the baler and the bale unrollers. You're going to have hay that's built up over by the flywheel on the other side for the plunger area. And you're also going to have a lot of hay in the back end here where the needles are and the knotters. You're going to have a lot of chaff that gets built up under that. Plus there's a lot more dust and debris that you're going to have because this unit is stationary, it's not moving. But today we're going to talk about how it's running, things you need to do to kind of pay attention to the system, and how to run it effectively. So these units for rebaling, generally I use 4x4 round bales that will yield about 10 to 12 square bales once we rebale. I also do a 4x5 bales, which will produce about 15 to 18 square bales. If you're into 4x6 bales, you're probably producing 20 to 25 bales, but I'm not really that familiar with them. But what you need to understand is that if you're doing the amount of time it takes for the rebaling process, by the time I put a bale in here, the time it's finished, it's about 5 minutes for a 4x4 bale. It's about 10 minutes for a 4x5 bale. And that's because you're producing more hay. So normally the process should take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes from beginning to end, so when you're going through bales. Now what I normally do is I like to stage bales, so I might take 5 to 10 round bales, set them up here, take the strings off, take all the net wrap off, make sure that they're clear of that, and then basically they'll be lined up here where I can grab them and put them in the bale and roller. Now remember that if you're going to put them in a bale and roller, make sure they're in a clockwise position. So going in here, all the grasses should be in a clockwise position where you'll see them, because when they go down this unwinder, they're going to unroll clockwise and come out counterclockwise and be fed directly into the square baler, and then you're going to be producing hay. So that's the process. This is how we're going to set it up, and hopefully you'll see it as we continue. So 7 or 8 years ago, I was looking for a rebaling unit that was out there. I was looking at chain unrollers that are of similar design as this Hustler. Then I found the Hustler brand, and this round baler, this unwinder at the time, was specifically designed for rebaling hay. And the price was right. I was getting into the hay business, and I thought, hey, you know what? This makes a lot of sense to me. I'm a one-man show. I don't have time to make squares in a field. I'd rather just make round bales. This may be a cost-effective way to see if I like rebaling, so I bought it. When I bought it, though, it came with caster wheels if I wanted it as an option, and generally you'd have to operate it from the tractor. In today's market, they now have a system where you have a valve system that you can operate the unroller from the ground. At the time that I bought it, it didn't have that. So when it was delivered to me, we've tried it out where I was operating out of the cab. I did not like that because I could not watch the feed. We plugged a few times. I had problems with cores, and it was to be something that I wasn't really that excited about. Then I immediately switched over to a valve system because a lot of people are promoting that system, and where it runs the valve from the tractor. I create a valve, and it's basically a two-stick valve where I'm able to raise this platform, and at the same time the other stick controls the feed. So when you're running this unroller, you're always running the feed. The only thing that you have to play with is this back plate. And what happens with the plate is it just presses the bale up against the tines, and it kind of controls the feed. And if you push too far, the bale could actually fall into the baler and you have a big problem. So you've got to really pay attention to how you feed out your hay. And that's why it's nice to be on the ground, because you can actually see the feed itself. Now, I did some modifications to this unit when I did buy it. Initially, like I said, I did not get the caster wheels. I put caster wheels on it to raise it up off the ground higher, so the debris that I have between the baler and the round baler I can accrue more of. So it gets me up higher on the ground. Second thing I did, and I have zero regrets for, is I put two tubes so I can actually use forks and actually pick this unit up and out away from the baler. Because with the caster wheels, it's very hard to roll this unit. It's kind of heavy, but it's actually nicer to pick it up with the forks and move it. So I can move it with a tractor or a skid steer without a problem and get it out of the way. And that's how I pretty much move this and set it up between the units. So I would definitely suggest, if you can get forks and some tubes welded to this unit, I think that would be the way to go. The tractor and size that you want to use in your rebaling operation, think about if you're inside or outside. If you're outside, it really doesn't matter. But if you're inside, you want to have a tractor similar to this LS. It's a diesel, it's 55 horsepower, but it's a tier 3. It doesn't produce very much diesel odor or carbon in the air, so it really doesn't gas you out of the building, for one. Number two, it's a low horsepower machine, so you're not really burning a lot of diesel fuel either. So it's a very economical machine for me when I'm doing my rebaling operation. It's something you might want to pay attention to. Just make sure that it has remotes, at least one set of remotes, because you're going to need that to operate your unroller. And also make sure it can obviously have a PTO system to run the baler. But having a loader also helps a little bit in the sense that it locks it down into the ground. So it keeps the tractor from bouncing back and forth. My other suggestion, if your tractor is bouncing back and forth, use blocks to kind of lock up the baler and lock up the tractor, so your machines aren't kind of bouncing around too much and running into, say, the unroller. So overall, though, if you're going to use a bigger tractor, and if you're going to go outside, it's probably not going to be as much of a concern. But if you're definitely on the inside, if you have fume issues, maybe you're going to come up with a different system as far as running an exhaust system outside the building, or maybe running the tractor and keep the tractor out of the building and keep everything, the baler and stuff, inside. That would work just as good too. But I definitely would choose a smaller tractor, not a larger one, if you can get away with it. So let's talk about one of the tricks when we're dealing with the tractor itself. Because we're baling inside, a lot of dust comes through. You can see this tractor's getting a little bit filthy through the dust and the debris. But what happens is your air cleaners are going to get plugged up, and you can see over here on the outside that the vents are starting to get plugged. Make sure you open up the hood, blow out the radiator and the cooling system on a regular basis, at least once a month, depending on how much you're going through, because it will plug up and it could overheat your tractor. So make sure you do that. Secondly, the reason why I like rebaling, especially when I'm on the ground, is I can run over here, open up the cab door, and shut off the PTO immediately, because I run it through the automatic mode. And I'll just pop this yellow button and I'll turn it off. Works out good for me. The other thing too is when we hook up remotes from the tractor to the unroller, I'll actually pull the lever that the remote is working off of and tie it to a bungee and keep it activated at all times. So when this tractor is running and I set the PTO to run the baler, I'm also running the unroller through the set of remotes, and it has to be constant flow. So that's why with this machine I actually have to use a bungee and keep that line flowing. And so I just strapped it from the seat to one of the levers and just keep it taut in the on position. That's really the biggest things with the tractors, is keeping it clean and making sure your air cleaner and your radiator is blowing out on a regular basis because of the dust that you do accrue in the building. So as we're talking about with tractors, these are this is where the pair of remotes actually go to, and they go to the unroller. The tractor is going to be hooked up to the baler at the hitch, and the PTO shaft is obviously going to be hooked up to the baler itself. The baler, it has to be in field position. It is not on a transport position. It is in the field position, meaning tractor is off to the side and like we're going down a row in the field. And that allows us to take the unroller and set it in the right position. The other thing too with the tractor, I run around 2,000 RPMs, and that's pretty much where I set it at when I run my rebaling system. You may want to do it at a higher level or lower level, whatever works best for you. But for myself, that's what I do at 2,000 RPM. And that works best for me. So with the baler and the unroller, you can see how tight this fits between the baler and the unroller. And what happens is when the tractor is actually operating the baler, you'll see this thing moving back and forth. So try to give yourself a little bit of gap so that you're not smashing into your unroller between the baler, but it is a relatively very tight fit. And while we're over here, I want to show you one of the little tips and tricks that you need to be aware of on a daily basis is that underneath the plunger, this is one of the areas where we build up with a lot of debris. So under here, you will see hay piling up underneath this flywheel and through the plunger system. This is one of these areas that every time you rebale, you have to clean it out and pull out this hay debris. And this is actually one batch, which is a good old armful of hay that was actually taken from underneath just for a short unrolling process. But this is something that you need to clean out daily. And if you don't, you could plug up and cause yourself problems. So pay attention to what falls out underneath the plunger. All right, down here is all this hay that was taken out, and you can see it's kind of coarse. It's taken out from underneath the plunger area, and it's something you need to kind of keep clean at all times because the debris that builds up here, like I say, is happening daily. And this is stuff you can easily feed out to livestock, horses, whatever. And this is what I wind up doing with this stuff after I accumulate it. But it's not wasted. It's just broken down and easy fed. But it's something you need to keep clean under here. So one of the biggest areas where you're going to have buildup, and you have to almost clean it out every 2 to 3 bales, is basically when we get under here, under where the needles are, down in here, and where the strings go. And this will actually pile up with debris, like I said, every 2 to 3 bales. So I use a rake, I reach in, I drag it all out, and I pull it in a pile, and you always keep this clean. This is something you have to pay attention to, because if you do not pay attention to this, what will happen is your strings may not tie, you may lose, you're going to have broken bales. It's going to drive you crazy. And it's one of the first things that nobody ever showed me. It's one of the first things I learned right off the bat. This area has to be cleaned all the time. So again, if you're going to look at the 3 different areas, before the plunger, do it once, at least once a day. The one between the baler and the unroller, you may have to do it every once a week, every 3 months, or every month. It all depends on how often you use your machine, how often it builds up. But this, every 2 to 3 bales, you're going to have to come back here and pull it. I find that second cut bales, because they're a little stringier, that they don't produce as much chafe. If your hay's a little drier or more brittle, you're going to have a quicker area of buildup. And even in here, you can actually see a lot of dust and buildup here where the knotters are. This area here, take a blower and blow this out on a regular basis, because after a while you're going to have a lot of debris that actually fills in here. And I always like to make sure my knotters are clean anyway. So it's just so I ensure that I have everything tying, because nothing worse than having downtime, and that's one of the first places you're going to have downtime is when stuff doesn't tie. And the other thing too is pay attention to your knots and your twine. Make sure that that's always full and you're always ready to go. So, but for the most part, that is the most important thing to do with the baler and the unroller, is to make sure everything is greased and clean. I don't grease that often. I only grease when necessary. Might be once a month. because this machine's inside, it's run every two to three times a week. So it's constantly running, but it's not exposed to the environment. And I'm not baling hundreds and hundreds of bales per week. And if I am, then I may, grease it a little more often. But for the most part, I'm not producing nearly the amount of hay that I would do if I was out in the field. So I kind of give myself a little bit more time. Also, you have to look underneath the baler itself. As those tines go around, they might have a buildup of hay, and I could see a bunch of hay underneath here. I may reach in with the rake and pull that out too. But try to keep this area clean. So when I designed this and I wound up putting out my baling unit, even though this is my indoor arena, it's on bare ground. What I did for the unroller area in the baler is I wound up putting stall mats down to keep the baler on a solid surface. So when I clean this area really good, I know that there's at least mats here and I have a base. Or if you have a concrete pad, that would work out great too. But I would definitely have some kind of base, whether you have the stall mat pads or concrete, where you can keep this a lot easier to be cleaned and scraped down. Because if you have it on outside or on dirt, you're gonna have moisture that actually is gonna stick this hay to the ground. It's gonna be harder for you to clean. So stall mats I thought worked out really good for me, and I can pull them out at any time, and it's easier for me to work with the system. So there's something you have to definitely modify when we deal with the baler, when you're ever setting up the unwinder. One is that you definitely need to get rid of the torsion bar. There's a bar that goes across, there's a bunch of springs, and they lay across the top of the tines. What happens is when you're going through a field, you're picking up the hay and it's compressing it down against the baler. Take that whole bar and the torsion springs, take that completely off. Because what's happening is you're not taking the hay and feeding up underneath anymore. You're taking it and your water falling into the top. So all your tines are doing is sucking it in and going right to the corkscrew area and pulling it into the baler. So you have to remove the torsion springs, guaranteed. The other thing is you're not having your tines down on the ground either. My tines are all the way up off the ground. I'm probably this high from the ground. So as my tines are going underneath, because I have all this hay buildup, the last thing I want to do is get them closer to the ground so they jam. So definitely keep your tines up off the ground high, but remove the torsion bar. That's the best suggestion I also have. The other thing too, and I didn't mention this, on the chainless hustler, is that this piece here can be adjusted, and it was a add-on piece. You definitely want to have this reflector board when you buy, say, a hustler, for example. Or if you don't have a hustler, you definitely want to create or make a piece to help flow the hay into the baler. The reason for this is that this kind of keeps a width or an area for me, so the hay actually goes into the baler. But because I have a gap, because this piece is not a little longer than what my baler chamber is, I basically can't get right up over top. Now I've seen some guys on videos where they actually have a wider mouth and they can actually run this deflector plate higher to fall into the baler. That works out great if you can, but I let the hay debris to be my bridge, I guess you want to say, and that's why you definitely want to feed this. Even if I clean this out underneath here, where all the hay debris actually falls, you're going to find out it fills up so fast, it's kind of like, well, why did I just clean all that shit out for? Because now it's filling back up. But the bottom line is, it's just the nature of the beast. You're going to have to kind of maintain it and find out what's the sweet spot when you want to clean it, when you don't want to clean it, type of thing. To me, like I said, I don't clean it till I get too much hay getting stuck here on the plates, and you're going to actually see the hay starting to bind or it's getting too tight underneath. Then I clean it out right away. And it's probably going to have about 2 to 3 yards worth of hay that's actually in here. So again, I just feed it out to animals, and it's the easiest thing to do. This valve system that you see here, it's just something I got out of farm catalog. It wasn't really that pricey. Basically 2-spool valve. This one is Chief, and this basically, I had this mounted to a stand, and it allows me to move this at anywhere I want, where I can sit there and unroll the hay. And works good, and I have no regrets for doing that. But I suggested, even like if you buy a Hustler today and they have a unit it's mounted to, you definitely want something where you're on the ground. You definitely do not want to operate out of a tractor. It's definitely not cost effective or efficient in any way, shape, and form. So when you set your baler and your unwinder together, what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of debris. Because what happens again is that as this bale is going around the unroller, it's going in a clockwise position. It's going to come over these points, and it's going to waterfall into the baler. You're going to have an area between the baler and the unroller. It's going to produce a large amount of loose hay that's going to kind of accumulate. This is something I don't clean out every day. I might clean it out when it gets too packed tight. Might happen every 2 weeks. Might happen once a month. It all depends on the coarseness and how much buildup I have. And you'll also see, and I'll kind of move the camera a little bit closer, that you will have hay that falls in between the tines, and you can see it's building up. What it does is it actually creates an opportunity, so when it waterfalls over the points, the hay is going to come in here and it's going to kind of lay on some of that loose stuff and actually just get fed into the baler itself. When you take a good look at this unroller, we'll kind of walk over to this side here. What I want you to see is that inside the cradle, you'll see a lot of hay building up in here. And with these tines that go through, and they're welded tines, that you'll see actually hay build up in here. When it gets too built up and it's starting to get stuck in my machine, I know it's time really to clean it out. But this is not something you have to clean out every day. And this same issue with the other side, I feed out all this loose stuff to livestock, whether it's horses, cows, goats, whatever, and feed it out. Don't waste it. It is amazing to me the waste that comes off these round bales, and you still produce a large amount of hay as you go. But you really don't lose that much, but it's amazing how much of the, I guess you want to say, the chaff that breaks down actually in the field, and you don't realize it until you're actually in the barn. So one of the topics that I want to talk about, and it's probably the most important that I think you should know about, is dealing with the cores. Now you have different options. Now what a core is basically as the bale gets smaller, you have two types of cores. You have a very soft core that'll fall apart on you, or you're going to have a very tight core. The cores that fall apart on you, I use the hay hook to help drag them off and out of the unroller chamber and try to get them in here as they break apart, because I don't want a big clump to fall in because you can plug your baler. So you use the hay hook to reach in and kind of drag it. And sometimes I'll actually use the unroller, start moving the tines, and have the tines operate like they normally do, and keep pulling it and turning it, you know, with the plate pushed high up against these tines, and try to get it to break apart. The worst thing you can do is have the core actually fall into the baler, because it could actually fall in and plug up here at that corkscrew part, or it can go in and plug up at where your knives are. So, you know, sometimes these cores are relatively large. So a lot of times I'll hold this and hold them in place here so I catch them before they fall out. But the best way to deal with cores, well, here's the other option with the core. You have several options. Option number one is to break it apart, you know, if it's a soft core. Two, pull the core completely out and feed it out, which I think is really a mistake. I think you're better off to unroll that core and get rid of it. Third is to let it fall in, which I think that it's going to be a huge mistake, because you're going to plug up a few times and you're going to be cursing yourself to death because it's going to be jammed in here. And because the unroller is in this position, you actually have to climb between the unroller and the baler to clean this out, unless you want to move everything out of the way, and it's really a big pain. So it's not like it is in a field where you can just jump off and get in here and get it taken care of. So I'm going to show you what I do with the cores. I have a small core here, and I just want to give you an example. What I do with the core, I'm going to grab it real quick. Here's a core I pulled off of a bale. And so what happens with this core, even though this one's somewhat soft, is that I make sure that I feed out this core by picking it up and having it hooked, and I grab it and I hold it right here on the baler. And I use the hay hook to hang on to this. And I want you to be very careful because you can actually somewhat get sucked into the baler, and you better let go of this hay hook. But what I'll do is I'll let the tines run through and turn, and they turn in a counterclockwise position, you know, because they're trying to pull things up into the baler. So what I'll do is have my bale that was in a clockwise position and just grab it and rotate it as the tines turn it. And what's going to happen is, then I'll catch it again with the hay hook, and I'll keep doing that, turning and catching, and then you can see it starting to fall apart. And that is how I will feed it. But the problem is, if you get too close to this corkscrew part, it'll actually pull it in. So you got to have a fine line between how far do you let it go in and how far do you don't, and you just keep turning it. And in a future video, I'll demonstrate this, but unfortunately, I don't have the help right now to kind of film it and show you at the same time. But you hook it and you turn it, and this is the best way to deal with the cores. So every time you get down to that core, you're almost going to grab it, pull it in here, and do this, and just do a turn. And it's only for real tight, compacted bales. But, you know, you'll save yourself a lot of bales, and a core could actually almost produce probably half a bale, and you really don't want to waste it. So I think your best thing to do is re-bale it. I've re-baled all my cores. I never had a problem. And only one time did I get where I actually lost my hay hook and it went into the knives and kind of screwed up my knife. But, you know, I didn't want to get dragged in. So, you know, operate here. Don't be hovering over the baler. You know, stay back a bit. And even if you're only working at half of the bale and you're spinning it and it's starting to suck it through and unravel it for you, then you can get a little closer and a little closer to the point where you let everything go. But you're going to understand the limitation of your baler eventually and what it will eat and what it won't eat. And but the core is probably the most frustrating part, and I would think that if I was the first time doing it and you get down to that core and you see a big chunk falling and you're like, oh my God, because I cringe every time a big chunk falls in because I'm hoping my baler doesn't jam up, because I know I'm going to have downtime for at least 15 to 20 minutes or even longer. And it's just so much better just to go slow and you know, deal with it. I did notice though that I had a breakdown this year, and I replaced my knives on my baler, and because we had to pull the whole plunger out and fix it, and that made a big difference. So having sharp knives, having new knives, it seems like it eats the hay like it should. But I had a bunch of cracks, and a lot of my knives had a chunk taken out of them, and a lot of it's because, you know, different objects you know you find in the hayfield, and they take a beating. But the best thing I can tell you, pull the cores, use these hay hooks. You know, the bales that fall apart aren't as big of an issue, but the hay hook will save you a lot of times from these cores to fall in. And you need to learn to manipulate the tines here. And like I say, always wear gloves, because these are big solid tines, and when you're reaching in here, you know, and these actually go very slow, but you know, you poke yourself on here, it's kind of painful. So this is a trial and error, something you'll learn to deal with, but that's how I attack the core problem, and I think that it'll definitely make a big difference. It's probably one of the biggest tricks I could tell you out of this whole video is how to manage cores, because you know, they're probably one of the biggest problems for somebody that's new to re-baling. And I prefer tight bales. I think they feed out a lot better. But when you get into soft bales, or you have a mound of hay where it's actually, some of it's too thick, sometimes it's better even to take the hay hook or even a pitchfork and slowly feed it into the baler instead of letting the bale just take a big chunk of it in here. So you're going to have to, again, play with things, and experience is your greatest teacher. I have two hay hooks. I keep them right here on the controller, my valve controller, and I use them religiously. It's the most important tool when it comes down to, you know, control. You know, working in the ag industry, like most of you guys do, you understand there's a lot of hazards with farm equipment. And, you know, the thing with re-baling is we have a constant hazard here because we're running this tractor and it's operating this baler. You know, and people have been lost fingers and body parts with balers. So all I can tell you is understand the machine is running, and even if you're doing what I showed you as far as dealing with the cores, let the tines pull and unroll the bale, and you're acting as the chainless hustler as far as unraveling it, and by moving it in a clockwise position yourself and using the hay hook, let the tines actually start cleaning off and kind of peeling off that the hay off the core. But you know, don't put yourself in a bad position where you're getting too close to the tines or you're going to fall into the tines. I want everybody to be safe here doing this. It's just an option and a way of dealing with the core that I want to get my point across to you. And you can do it safely. You just have to be smart about what you do. And I think that's just like any other farm equipment that we all deal with every day. Is, you know, safety is number one. These are moving parts, and loose clothing or, you know, something that gets in the way could actually suck you right in. So be careful. And, you know, that's your safety advice for, you know, this video. Another thing you need to be aware of is that if this baler plugs up and you have to shut down the tractor, you shut everything down. And then use the flywheel on the other side to get the tines to move to open up that door where the knives are. And then you can get in there and start digging it out. But only do that when the machine is off. So if you plug, again, go to the flywheel, start moving it, and opening up that door the best you can. It'll kind of move the plunger, and then the plunger will actually kind of move through. And, you know, as that door opens up, you can get into that chamber and pull out the hay. I would pull out the hay. You want to make sure everything is clear here and out of the way, then restart your machine up. Sometimes you can try to run it when you plug up, but you know, after you break a few shear bolts, it's not going to do any good. And that brings me to this piece of advice. Make sure you have a lot of shear bolts regardless. I go through shear bolts a lot, and if I plug up for any reason, first thing it does is shear a bolt. So make sure you have about 20 or 30 shear bolts because you're more likely to plug up, you know, doing a re-bale than you will probably in the field, you know, unless you have real fat windrows. And the reason why you plug up is because when these bales are going through the system, they're very thick a lot of times when you first start off. And if you feed too much and all of a sudden you jam, you know, again, the flywheel is the first thing that's going to go with that shear bolt. So have enough of them on hand. And again, shut everything down before you address when you're plugged up. So after the bale comes off the chute, I usually put my hay in wagons. And for myself, I do a lot of this operation. I used to have somebody help me all the time, and I got to the point where I can't even find help to do that. So I get to the point where I'm baling this myself. So I may run this baling operation, re-baling operation. I may make 1 or 2 bales, making about 20 to 30 square bales. Then I'll just throw them up on this wagon, and as the baler, after this fills up, I might jump off and stack, and then continue on and keep loading up and re-baling. But I prefer it wagons. You can have an accumulator system, you can have an elevator system. You may even decide you want a kicker baler system on the back end of your baler to shoot it into a wagon. No matter how you decide to do it, it's best to actually have some system where you can at least take the hay and start stockpiling it. Initially, I thought I was just going to take these wagons and offload them and drag them out of the way and store them and just keep bringing in new wagons to fill them. But what I decided to do in my system, which is very small, and I don't sell to millions of people, and I don't go through a lot of square bales anymore because I do a lot more with turnout with my horses, and I feed a lot of round bales out. If I decide to sell, I manage what I need to make, I sell it, and I make another batch right away. I don't kind of sit on it and wait. I find hay wagons to be the easiest. They're the cheapest. You know, these wagons I bought at an auction were $300 a piece, and they're perfect because they're not really great on the road, but they're great for sitting in here and loading up hay on them, and it's easier for me to deal with. And plus too, I think a lot of my customers, they want their hay and their strings to be intact and the bales not to be deformed. So their hay is relatively pretty fresh, I guess you want to say, from the baler to the wagon. And for me, as far as management goes, I don't have to stack them in a mow. I don't have to deal with the mice issue and them defecating and urinating on the strings in some of these mows that, you know, it doesn't work out to be that fresh. When these bales are made, they're dense, they're tight, and they're immediately either sold right off this wagon, they're fed right out. And I think that's the most easiest and cost-effective thing to do because there's no handling. You know, and that's the downfall of making squares is the handling issue. Here, I really don't even handle them. And what's nice also in the re-baling program is that when you're making square bales and you're putting them on the wagon here, you're not bouncing around, you're not worrying about losing a load. Everything is just relatively in a simple, easy place, and I'm really not handling them. I handle these bales maybe a couple feet, and that's the most they're touched by me, other than when I sell them or pull them off the wagon. So, but as far as design goes, how you want to stack or move your bales after they come out of the baler, I think it's all up to personal choice and what works best for your system. You know, my system now, I think that as long as you're inside, you can't go wrong with being inside, because I can bale at any time. I don't have to move any of these bales around. I don't have to fight the weather, and it works best for me. The worst thing I deal with is cold. And if the weather is cold, sure, nobody wants to be outside in cold, but I've been out here at below zero baling hay, and it works great. So, but again, you have to have the facility. The facility makes the big difference. And, you know, that's really the best thing I can tell you. And keep your hay dry. The hay has to be dry. It has to be stored inside the barn. Best thing you can do. I hope everybody enjoyed the video on tips, tricks, and setup in the rebaling process. You know, using a one-piece unit like the Hustler, there are things you need to kind of be aware of, and especially with the baler, and how to maintain it, and tricks on how to process the material. So I'm hoping I covered a lot of things that will answer some of your questions, give you some kind of preconceived idea on how to deal with the situation. And the series is continuing, and I hopefully that you guys get something from it, and I will see you soon.